Amit Tiwari is the Vice President of Strategic Alliances and Systems Engineering at Affirmed Networks, and Amit is here with us in Dallas at the TIA 2015 Network of the Future Conference. Welcome.
Glad to be here.
Let's talk about the benefits of NFV-based architectures.
Well, we've noticed one thing, Deborah, as the data networks have ramped up, it has been great for subscribers. It's been great for enterprises. Any service, anywhere, anytime, that's a great mantra if you think about it. What has also happened is, as more and more of the data usage has become pervasive, folks are using more and more of this. The ARPU, the average revenue per subscriber, that was the metric that the business was actually using a lot. What has happened is it has gotten to a certain peak and then it has plateaued. So the question really becomes, how much are folks, companies, individuals, businesses willing to pay for their data usage, with an expectation that the data services are available everywhere and anywhere? So the question then becomes is, if the cost side of the equation can only go to a certain point, what are the transformative technologies that need to be brought in to actually drive those costs down? That's one part of the equation. We at Affirmed call this the defensive measure, right? So the cost with an NFV-based architecture is radically different for a mobile network than it is for the legacy architecture. The second part, which is actually even more interesting, Deborah, that we've found in all our discussions with the MNOs worldwide, is what we call the offensive play. As more and more subscribers, enterprises, and businesses are using data services, they want to use every service anywhere, and the line between what they used to sit down on their desktop and laptop and do at a desk has blurred with all these tablets and large screen smartphones. They want to do this anywhere, going on a train, sitting at an airport, anywhere they want, right? At a stadium, any venue. So now the question is, those services and creating those services on the mobile untethered network creates a lot of opportunity. Hence, we call it the offensive play. These are the things that enable mobile operators to actually drive revenue from these new services. So on the one hand, the NFV-based networks drive the costs down for deploying those services. On the other hand, they enable the power of creating those services and hence generate new revenue opportunities.
And specifically, could you tell us then, why are operators interested in moving from legacy architectures?
I'll go back a little bit to the answer I gave earlier. The operators are facing this huge opportunity in front of them as the use of data services has been growing by leaps and bounds. The latest projections are in the next 3 years they will grow sevenfold, the mobile data services. With these services comes the expectation of new types of services. People want to stream music, people want to stream video, they want to be able to connect to any back-end enterprise server, do financial transactions, they need to do secure transactions. Each one of these services is an opportunity. The massive use of data is a challenge. Now, if you compare and combine these two, the mobile operators see this as an ability for them to drive those services and the revenue that comes with it, and in hand drive down the costs of what it takes to actually build out those networks, address those capacity issues.
And could you tell us more then about what is the Affirmed Networks story?
Sure. Affirmed is about 5 years old. We started back in 2010. Several of us, in the management team at Affirmed, come from past startups. We've been quite fortunate. Several of us have been in a few successful startups. And back in 2010, when we started discussing about doing something interesting, the one question that came about was essentially an existential one. Does the world need another mobile data startup? Why do something like this again? And the question that we pondered and then the answer that we came upon was, if you look at the rest of the computing world, the IT type of technologies, the virtualized technologies, the technologies that actually drive the cost down and enhance capability and availability of services, had permeated the entire computing world except for the telco business. So as we were looking back and forth, at this kind of vantage point, the question really became, if we were to actually take the best practices of IT-based technologies, apply them to essentially a stateful network. See, the mobile network is a stateful network where they actually maintain my session, your session, and they know what kind of application that we are using, and hence what kind of QoS we would need for it. if we were able to apply those best practices to a stateful network as opposed to what was being done in a stateless network in the IT side, we saw a major disruption point for this business. That's really what came together as the genesis of the idea that became Affirmed. And at that point, we really placed a few essential bets, right, in technology. Number one, we said the telco side of the business has got to be disrupted for it to keep up with the demand for data and the cost pressure that the mobile network operators are under, number one. We said this has to be scaled out on x86 type architectures, the Intel compute resources that were ramping up in terms of capability and price performance ratio. We said this has to be leveraged. And number two, we said if we were to decompose these network elements down to their fundamental building blocks, on the one hand, it provides a lot of flexibility. On the other hand, it actually creates quite a few challenges for mobile operators, because how do you run services with all these different, think about these. These are blocks all there, right? These blocks of services. So we said the orchestration of these services, which is essentially what we now term in the industry as service function chaining in the Mano IETF group, that capability was something we baked in from the get-go, day one. If you look at those few things, that really was the genesis of the idea that became Affirmed, and everything that we build today is actually built with that vision and that principle in mind.
What is Affirmed's traction with carriers globally, deployments and trials?
Sure. This has been very interesting. In the last 5 years, when we first started, the notion that we brought about virtualized, compute resources, decomposed services, and on-the-fly, real-time stitching of services, leveraging compute resources, was considered a truly transformative one when we started talking about this and evangelizing this idea back in 2010. So here's a very interesting thing that happened, Deborah. We had a few CTOs at mobile operators who were pretty much on this page. They were seeing the same challenges that we at Affirmed were. In fact, we actually dialogued with them, before we, came about, the whole architecture and such. Then there was another group of folks who were looking at this as a radical change, and they're like, is this something that can really happen? So I remember the early days in 2010. We used to go out and speak with, CXOs, and we used to evangelize this idea. At some places, we actually joined together and started dreaming of the future. In some cases, there was a lot of back and forth, like, how do you get this done? How do you implement this, this architecture / this vision? This was all going on. We had traction with a few operators, very strong, and with some other operators, we were evaluating and we were architecting what could be a potential solution. Then we built our product as all this was going on. Then in 2012, when a whole set of tier 1 MNOs got together and published the NFV position paper, that was a sea change in the whole world of telecom in the mobile side. What ended up happening with that was folks saw the groundswell of operators who were now behind this concept. And what happened for Affirmed was, given the background that I just shared with you, we pretty much were the only vendor out in the world who actually had a product that was ready at the point when this position paper was published. And so what that led to do was, all of a sudden the discussion shifted from evangelizing and actually convincing folks about what we're doing to actually, hey, you are there. What use case can we actually use for you, right? And all of a sudden there was such a big ramp up from 2012 October when the position paper came out to actually now, and it's still, the groundswell is there. I'm very happy to share with you, we have about 25 commercial deployments today for Affirmed and about 45 trials. And the best part is, not only do we have these deployments and trials, we actually have deployments in pretty much every geography, major geography that you can think of, and we have trials in every major geography that you can think of as well. So it has been a really interesting story with an accelerated pace of acceptance.
What has Affirmed learned as the only vendor being commercially deployed? How have these lessons learned helped extend your lead?
As much as we look back and think of the success that Affirmed has enjoyed in this area, when we get into the networks, right? I mean, at the end of the day, these are networks that evolve based on what folks decide to do with those services. So as much as we think about it and we we live these services, we live this architecture. So do the CXOs that we work with and the folks at mobile network operators. But as we have deployed them, as you can imagine, there have been lots of learnings, right? Because you can sit there and design and leverage our experience from the past a lot towards what you're building. But ultimately, it is the network. It is the kinds of services, it is the kinds of things that people dream of and then implement on that network that drive the workloads that we have to handle. So we have learned quite a bit, of this usage. For example, we have seen what we used to call in the legacy world as peak hour. There is no such thing as peak hour. The traffic peaks and stays peaked, or you can call them a series of peaks, right, throughout the 24-hour cycle, right? What that means is, as part of virtualization, elasticity has become very important, right? What really, if you think about this, because there are so many different peaks or a continued peak in the network, the ability to use the entire network compute as a pool and then be able to ramp up services and ramp down services on the fly depending on the usage and the services that are being used is such an essential factor, right? So when you first started off, a lot of the discussion was about virtualization and how it could be done just for leveraging high performance and deploying new services with service function chaining. A lot of the discussion slowly and has transformed towards how do you now bring in elasticity? How can you actually ramp up these services, performance, transaction, capacity on the fly, up and down? Sometimes they moved in tandem, sometimes they don't. So with elasticity, you can actually do all these different things and leverage resources for whatever is the most important requirement at that given time. Things like this have really helped us actually fine-tune our solution. Like we said, being the one only commercially deployed, not only are we the one only commercially deployed, we also have baked in capabilities like this elasticity and a lot of other things that we have learned in our 25 commercial deployments that we have constantly baked into our releases. So today we are on our generally available release 6. You can imagine every major release has got these learnings and the future vision of the company, the industry baked into it, and that's what has really helped us accelerate our lead over other suppliers.
What are the new services that are driving NFV deployments, and how does M2M and IoT play a role?
Absolutely, and actually, M2M and IoT that you mentioned are part of those new services, right? So I'll share with you something very interesting, Deborah. If you look at the networks today, right? You have the human-to-human smartphone feature phones that are already on the network. There's a good amount of Internet of Things types and machine-to-machine type communications that coming up now. But just imagine this. What we're talking about in not even the very far future. We're talking 2018, 2020, 3 to 5 years out. We're talking about the devices far outnumbering the human smartphones that are on the network, right? You have the population of the world, which is at a certain point. You have connected devices which are already more than the population of the world that are already on the network. And we're talking numbers like 50 billion of these connecting to the network in the 2018, 2020 timeframe. They play a very critical role in the smart networks of the future. And talking about the learnings that we have seen, one of the very interesting things that we have seen is we have gone into MNO deployments for new services like machine-to-machine. And what we have found is as they deploy and certify those services, there are characteristics for different verticals. Think about this. A smart meter, the kinds of network requirements that a smart meter service has are very different from telemedicine, right? Talk about the real-time, accuracy, pinpoint, latency in terms of very, very real-time, close to real-time transmission is different than what you could do in a batch processing from soda machines, for example, right? So you have these multiple verticals and hundreds of millions of these devices that will come onto the network, each with their own unique requirement. So having the intelligence that I was talking about from service function chaining, applying appropriate policy to the soda machine service versus the telemedicine service, and doing this intelligently on the network, on the single network, that is so critical for the operators, number one, to drive their costs down, and number two, to actually handle appropriate quality of service, which enhances the user experience for these different classes tremendously. Now think about this. All of the use cases that we're talking about in the machine-to-machine Internet of Things type of services, they all apply to the human services as well. because you also have, you have smartphones that actually have apps. Think of the health apps there. They're very similar to the remote monitoring apps that, the hospitals would want for patients as they're monitoring them at home with, specialized devices. So the line between the IoT type services and the human services and the apps that we use today are already blurring, but the appropriate class of quality of service that enhances the appropriate user experience is very critical. So with our deployments, what you learned is we can actually build a network with the intelligence and the policy applications where the same network can cater to the demands of each one of these verticals in an intelligent fashion, and that brings tremendous economies of scale to the mobile operators and gives them a huge opportunity to then monetize these services, not just for machine-to-machine IoT, but also for a human. And another use case that I can share with you in this area is that of MVNOs and MVNEs. So mobile network operators can actually create a virtual network operation or become a virtual network enabler, an MVNE, for other MVNOs that can actually now turn up new classes of service. One thing that we are noticing is operators are very successfully able to target niche markets. They would go after the teenager market because they have a certain set of requirements. They want certain things that would be very popular with teenagers that might not be very popular with business users, right? Rather than go out and actually change the essential brand of a mobile network operator, they can have an MVNO which is targeted for a teenage market, right? Or it could actually be an MVNO that's targeted for a very specialized app like fleet management and such, right? So you can also see an MVNO kind of a scenario really playing out on this network. And again, if you can differentiate the traffic, if you can virtually compartmentalize that traffic and then apply the appropriate policy on it, that makes a huge strategic advantage for mobile operators in being able to deploy such services.
Well, thank you very much for being with us here today.
Thank you.